Thank you for tuning into the Island Treasures podcast. We value the insights shared by our guests and host, but it's important to note that their personal experiences are intended to inform and encourage, and not to replace professional, legal, or medical advice. With that, we are ready for today's exciting episode. Welcome to Island Treasures, a place for caregivers to hear encouragement from other caregivers who, by sharing their experiences, offer helpful information and resources for your caregiving journey. This podcast is brought to you by Alongside Caregiver Consulting, and I'm your host and caregiving consultant, Alison Van Schie from beautiful Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. When I was introduced to today's guest as the author of A Toxic Brain, Revelations from a Health Journey, I had no idea how much her story would impact my own life. In her book, she unpacks the complexities encountered while unraveling the causes of her late husband's mysterious illness and details her unrelenting pursuit for answers regarding his acute, disabling illness. From her experiences, my guest is compelled to share an all too familiar path that millions find themselves traveling now as caregivers. She describes caregiving as an endurance run of the body, mind, and heart, and herself as a senior who is well seasoned with a dozen years of caregiving for neurologically impaired loved ones. She has so much to offer. So join me now as I welcome Sandra Strauss. Welcome, Sandra. It's lovely to have you as a guest on the Island Treasures podcast for caregivers.
Well, I am so delighted to be here with you.
It's going to be a great chat. So, Sandra, could you explain a little bit about your caregiving story? I know it's not a little story, but if you can explain a little bit about it.
All right. There's kind of a lot of details, and I think I have to provide some of that because this was not a more typical manifestation of dementia, and therefore the caregiving required. It was not just this kind of slow cognitive decline and recognizing, that he just wasn't right. My husband wasn't right. My husband was 59 at the time, and he used his brain in his job because he served as an expert witness on a lot of toxic tort cases. And he was well known among legal circles and with doctors about his capacity to win these cases, to help his attorneys win cases on behalf of clients, oftentimes that had been injured from sick building syndrome, from asbestos, from a lot of workplace injuries. But what happened one morning, I walked in to see him. He had never come to bed. I didn't realize. He was slumped over his computer. He was startled when I came into the room. He stood up, and he was visibly shaken. He had these tremors that I had never, ever seen before. And he was speaking strangely. I mean, my husband was the most grounded guy. And now he was saying weird things that I'd never heard him say. And, so I was obviously really shocked and scared. I was terrified because I did not know. So I took him to the doctor. Then they recommended that he go into the hospital. They tested him, all the conventional tests, MRIs, CAT scans, EEGs, spinal taps, nothing showed. And so they released him about a week later, saying he had probably generalized anxiety disorder. This was the most grounded guy. He was my rock, and this was not at all the guy that I knew. So I knew that wasn't accurate. So I continued to seek answers, went to neurologists, went to psychiatrists, really went on the path of looking, what's wrong with him? Well, the fact that he was 59 at the time, they didn't even consider dementia. And they thought he was just psychiatric and that he was stressed, work had gotten too much, dealing with financial concerns. And I could understand that. But no, it didn't explain other physical symptoms. He had gut issues. He had a rash all over his body. He had these undulating abdominal thrusts. I had never seen this before. And so I'm documenting all this to the doctors. I mean, I was like on email all the time saying, okay, now this is what I'm noticing. And I thought they would be able to go, oh, okay, now we get it. This makes sense. But I talked about language. I talked about how he would continue to repeat words, how he was not in, a sense of connectedness. He had totally lost a sense of self. I mean, we raised our girls on affirmations. Mm. And so I had, the cheerleader, I am powerful. So anyway, this went on for over a year. Mm. And again, without answers, I was just dealing every day, not knowing, what his situation would be. But I found him on the sofa one afternoon with a knife. Mm. He whispered to himself, but I could hear it. It wouldn't hurt very much. And I go, oh man, this is very weird. Ooh. Well, around that time, I don't know why, I looked underneath the mattress and there was a knife.
Oh boy.
And I called the psychiatrist and he said, you've got to get him into the hospital. Well, this was not probably the fifth or sixth time we had gone to the hospital in a year, emergency. And so when we got there, he was admitted, went through the same test, still didn't show anything. He always aced the mini mental test. And I'm going like, how can you do that?
Yeah.
Because he could be having the strange reactions and then, he would be fine. He could tell you anything. Probably could still play Trivial Pursuit with him at that.
And win.
And win. And win. But what happened then is he actually, one of the psychologists that he worked with on cases, was called in to do a neuropsych test, which can show you the parts of the brain that aren't working so well. So the psychologist who knew him said, he is just a shell of the man that I knew. I mean, my husband had so much charisma. And here he was in this state of withdrawal, of, not at all like him. And he surmised that because he knew him so well and he knew how his brain was, it was his living, knowing, how to win these cases and everything. He thought he was just so depressed and that they advised at that point electroshock therapy. Now, years before he ever got sick, and he had some clients that had done that, and we talked about it. It's like, oh man, we would never, ever do that. That's just, no. But I was at a point where I thought, well, maybe their theory has some validity to it. Go ahead. Well, he came out of the second one and he whispered so faintly, nothing is working. Mm. Nothing is working. Well, coincidentally, that day, and this is why I do believe in synchronicity, I received a phone call from the co-author of another book that I'd written. And he said, I have a client here, I'm coaching her on speaking, and she has a lot of the same symptoms, not quite as severe, but brain fog and some of these things that you told me about, Rick. And anyway, she called me up and she says, I want some of your books. But what I think I'm here to tell you is that I think there's answers that you may want. And I said, she came to my house, came to the door, and within 20 minutes, she showed me, she had all this research that she had done on biotoxins, on how mold and Lyme and other things are affecting people's bodies. And so she came to the hospital with me, and That was a turning point
Mm.
because the doctor was making his rounds. How likely is that? Making his rounds right at that time. He got us into the computer room where there's a test. It's called a VCS test. And it visually is a screening device for biotoxin exposure. And so I stood behind my husband. It's a very simple test. It's like, is this line going to the right? Is it straight up? Is it going to the left? Or do you not see anything? Well, I could see standing behind him that he was getting it all reversed.
Mm.
And so that was a big clue. We stopped all electroshock therapy at that point. She brought me a book from Dr. Shoemaker, Richie Shoemaker, who was doing groundbreaking work on mold and biotoxins. And it all made sense because all the symptoms that he had were there. I mean, there's any number of symptoms, but basically he, became autoimmune, and he had the gut issues, he had the brain issues, he had, the rashes, he had these symptoms that come and go and new ones come. He'd get dizzy, and I was like, now what? Now? And so it finally answered it. And I was fortunate. It took a while to see him. We were able to get in because he was very, very popular to have people because they're desperate. In fact, his book was called Desperation Medicine because people have been everywhere searching and they're not getting answers. So, of course, we got to visit with him. And he put it all together. His biomarkers showed clearly that he had excessively high inflammation, some of the highest that Dr. Shoemaker had seen at the time. And he had genetics. And this is so important and why I really want people to be aware of this. 25% of the population have the genetics that makes them poor detoxifiers. So here he was. Mold was just one of the things. He grew up, his father was a leather tanner, and the leather tannery was on the property of his house right next door. And so he had all this. He used to jump for fun. He used to jump in the tanned hides with all the chemicals that were used in the processing of the leather. And so he had 20 years of that. He had heavy metal exposure. We had tests for heavy metals, and he was off the chart in aluminum and mercury and lead, very high in lead. And of course, all those things are linked to brain issues. And then because mold certainly wasn't on my mind at all, but the test showed mold exposure. And so then I did, tests on our house, and sure enough, there was mold in our basement where my husband had a home office. And my mom moved into that. When my mom moved into that office, or it was a bedroom, he moved upstairs. She was now in the room that we did not know at the time had toxic mold. We had water that would just, when it would rain heavy or heavy snow, it would melt. Just a little water. We didn't have any clothes in the, we just had some, things that we don't use very often. And it was in that room. Well, progressively, my mom got sicker and sicker. I took her to the same doctor and identified that she also had the genetics. And I have the genetics. And my girls, so it was a real something that, again, conventional medicine wasn't checking, and still I don't think it's checking, unless you go to functional doctors. So from that point forward, I at least understood using the protocols of Dr. Shoemaker, which was detoxification. He used medications for detoxification. And back to his experience in the hospital. So I told the doctor, we're stopping electroshock therapy. We're going to go on this program. And they basically booted us out of the psych ward because that's where he was. And they put him in just general hospitalization and put him on the detoxification. And with a few days, it was dramatic. He was able to go when we discharged him. It was around the time of my mom's birthday. He was able to go to celebrate her birthday. It didn't resolve. I don't want to give people that. It didn't resolve because it's a longer story, but it identified that toxicity was one of the root causes, one of the major root causes that had affected my husband's brain.
And using detoxification methods were effective.
Detoxification. And so throughout his journey, now I recognize the importance of detoxification. The problem was, once I was told, before, I knew I wasn't able to keep him at home because he had revoked my POA at one point. He HIPAA'd me out of his care. It was quite a journey dealing with someone with brain issues that had a car. I couldn't take it away. We legally couldn't take it away because the car was in his name. And I kept running into roadblock after roadblock. But when he was, and we did have him in so many different types of facilities based on the level of care that he needed. So we first started with daycare while he was home, and he was often too sick that he couldn't go to daycare. And then we tried a group home for a while, but his demands for care were greater than they could handle. And I was working with a care consultant at the time. She was great. Good. She was really great in helping me to sort out, because here he was 59, 60 years old at the time. It was certainly nothing that I wasn't anticipating. And finally, we got him he had to go from group home to skilled nursing for a while. And in the course of 3.5 years, the doctors dismissed dementia entirely. The one person that did suspect it died. And I had an internist who was willing to work with us, and he didn't understand it, but he was willing to work together with Dr. Shoemaker. And so that was great. But then he developed cancer and he closed his practice. So we were basically left on our own to kind of sort this out. And after 3.5 years, he was given a diagnosis of frontal temporal or subcortical dementia. And they said he must be supervised for 24 hours a day. And so from that point forward, I just accepted, okay, this is what it is. But I kept him on the protocols of detoxification, which made a big difference. Because when he was in an assisted living facility, doing the protocols and nutritional support that I provided, a lot of protein shakes and things, he became like the mayor of this assisted living facility. And what happened during the course of the 12 years of his illness, when we were doing the detoxification protocols, which I would give the facility, here's what he needs, this is the process. When they would do it, it made a big difference in his manifestation of symptoms. Again, we had to change different facilities for various reasons. When they refused, and some doctors absolutely refused to do it, or the nursing staff didn't want to be bothered with doing it. And so I'd say, oh, must be time to get some more of the stuff. No, they had plenty. They just didn't give it to them. So it was a long struggle to really have them understand. Some did and some didn't. And when he was able to do what his body needed, see, they just, again, medicine wasn't at that point where they understood the importance of detoxification, particularly for those vulnerable. And so that is clearly a message I want to communicate to people, is that we need to know our genetics. And it's not just the APO4, it's other things as well, the ability to detoxify. Because what happened then is, of course, he had this diagnosis of dementia, and I just accepted that's what it was, and we continued to do the protocols. The 11th year of his illness, he was deteriorating, he was falling, he was hospitalized, and we went to do a follow-up after he was discharged. And the neurologist said, well, you do know that he's in the latter stages of Lewy body dementia. No one had ever told me. I, through my internet research in 2004, had suspected this is what it was, but I was told, no, it can't be that. Or we'll never know unless you do a brain autopsy. So it was Lewy body dementia. And then I felt compelled to write this book.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was writing the book is when I heard a podcast featuring Dr. Dale Bredesen, who's the author of The End of Alzheimer's and other books. Brilliant brain researcher. And he was talking about a toxic type of Alzheimer's. And my radar went up. He spelled out the characteristics of what toxic Alzheimer's looks like, the biomarkers. My husband had checked all the boxes, the things that identify that for him. So then, fortunately, I was using some of his information, and I reached out to him to get approval to use his stuff. And I said, you're probably one of the few people in the entire world that can answer this. They said that he had Lewy body dementia. We didn't have a biopsy or autopsy because he had just been through too much, just chose not to. But he said, you can have both Lewy bodies and tau tangles so you can be manifesting both at the same time. It's not just one. So it was like clarity of putting all these puzzle pieces together and then getting the answer. And then my call to action was, there's many people. I mean, I used to sit in a neurologist's office, and I'd say, what do they say you have? And it's some type of autoimmune. I do. I'm nosy. I'm sorry.
What's going on with you?
And I mean, I'd have these discussions with people, or I was sitting.
You were fact finding. You really were. You were doing research even when you weren't doing research.
Exactly. So that was my aha moment when I learned about toxicity. And I knew that this was not something that was being identified in conventional practices. And then a realization that, oh my goodness, there could be millions of people dealing with this. And then Dr. Bredesen even had more information. And that was his research is showing that a lot of Alzheimer's and cognitive decline can be reversed.
That's encouraging. That's wonderful news.
It's wonderful news for those already on the path. It's also wonderful news for us to know that we can prevent. Now, I know I've got the poor detoxifying gene.
Right.
I know I have to eat right. I have to do my exercise. I have to do the lifestyle things to help prevent bringing on the manifestation of any of this. So that is really the big takeaway. And then again, how this relates to caregiving. So then my other piece of the puzzle was, oh my gosh, if we can prevent this, if we can reverse this, caregiving doesn't become the issue that it is. And we know the statistics are pretty frightening with the increase of dementia. I just had a call from a friend yesterday. And she actually had read my book. She did some social media for me. And she was telling me about her dad and how he had a very quick manifestation of cognitive decline and behavior issues. And of course, they diagnosed him with Alzheimer's and they gave him some medications. But she had read the book. She knew there was much more that could be done. So that's why it's a need for changing the paradigm now, that we're looking beyond the classic, with toxicity increasing to the degree that it has. I mean, in our food, in our air, in our water, in our products, consumer products, we're bombarded with toxins. They are affecting us, and some are being affected more because of their genetics. And so we've got to address this, and our medical system needs to address this. Fortunately, there are practitioners. They're called functional practitioners. That's a different form. They really look at the root causes. So what's causing these symptoms? It's not just giving a medication that treats the symptom. It's really looking at the underlying cause. So if it's toxicity, the importance of detoxification is critical. And there's, I didn't realize, I've also had my own tests. Dr. Bredesen recommends a cognoscopy.
A cognoscopy?
Kind of like a colonoscopy of your brain.
Okay. Can you explain that to me?
I will. It's a series of tests that show kind of what's happening in your brain. And like looking at different, a yellow triangle and a purple square, and you look at the repetition, you look at what did I see, and it's like, whoa. It was sort of surprising when I did it. And then tapping the keyboard with your finger so fast, and it all measures things. And so there's also a different type of MRI. Had they done that on my husband, it's called a volumetric MRI. It shows the brain shrinkage. It shows the areas of the brain which are really being affected. And so it's precision. It's not just taking a collection of symptoms and identifying, okay, it looks like Alzheimer's, It's saying exactly what's driving it. It might be the diet, it might be too much glucose or insulin resistance. It's all different things. So Dr. Bredesen has identified, I think now at least 40 different root causes that can contribute to, brain issues. And so it's like looking at what those are and then making adjustments. And I had to go, gluten-free because that was not working for me. Sometimes they recommend either, a Mediterranean diet or a keto diet because you're burning fat. So there's things that we can do that help to prevent us from going down that path and to maintain our health. I'm all about vibrant health destinies. And, it means that we have to do stuff. We have to, it's like, gluten-free, and that means I did discover some new recipes and they're good. And it's like, okay, this is good.
So Sandra, what you're saying is how important it is to prioritize our health and to be proactive with our decisions and our actions. And I just want to say that reading your book has been so revealing to me. So I want to thank you for writing the book and expanding my understanding of things, because I do confess I was dismissive, I think, of toxins. Like they've always been there, but they haven't been there to the degree that they are there now.
Exactly. And I was dismissive too for a while. My whole background has been involved in wellness and educating, and talking about things that affect people's wellness and well-being. And I remember, you hear, I think it's almost like you're on overload. It's like something else could be hazardous to you. Something else could be hazardous to you. And you just go, oh, well, And now I don't have that same attitude. It's like, there's certain things I buy organic. I'm the former VP of Consumer Affairs for the Fruit and Vegetable Association.
Yeah.
But I think organic is really important. It doesn't take out all risk, but it certainly is a good choice. And I think I have a chapter in the book called Smart Choices for Our Toxic Times. And these are just some things that we need to do. Another thing, back to the mold issue. There's little plates that you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's or your hardware store. And you just open them up and you have them in your room 30 minutes, you close it, you check it 24 hours, 48 hours, see if any mold is present. And then if you want, you can have it tested as to what type of mold that is. And I just did that recently. Or you can bring in someone, and I've had that too, someone that really professionally, they check it out, and we had our house checked and there was no issues. But there's things that we just need to do. Our water, look at our, tap water has all sorts of things in it. So.
Well, the fluoride debate was like, oh, I'm glad it's there, but now I'm not glad. Like, you just reveal so many things, and mercury, and, we used to play with the little beads of mercury that were inside the thermometer. It's like, you shouldn't be doing that.
Because mercury is the second most toxic substance on Earth, mercury. So, and of course, what do we have in some of the new light bulbs, all the new light bulbs? It's mercury. So we also have to question, and I bring this up in the book too, some of the regulations. I think we need to really look at, why are we allowing some of these things into our products? Because they do impact us, and it is largely out of our control. GMOs is a case in point. They're known to have a lot of negative health effects. So again, we have to make choices. We have to build our awareness. And again, what's your intention? My intention is we should have vibrant health destinies, and that it is our responsibility to do what we can. We were not going to do it perfectly, but at least most of the time to have a focus that, yes, I'm going to get my exercise. Yes, I'm going to get sleep. They now know. They keep finding more and more things. They know that your brain detoxifies while you sleep. And it gets rid of the toxins, or it helps to get rid of the toxins. So those are things that, and a lot of people are having sleep issues. And a lot of that is because their bodies are out of balance. Our bodies are largely out of balance because of the environment in which we, live. So we have to just be as proactive as possible.
Yep, proactive and informed.
Yes, yes.
That's quite the encapsulation of your caregiving experience, but you have so much more. And let's talk about the book, A Toxic Brain, for a little while. I just cannot imagine the amount of research that went into that. It is comprehensive. It is amazing. It's very educational. So tell me more about the book.
Thank you. Well, it started out just to share the story. I wasn't going to go into all the detail other than talking about the mold and the biotoxin pathway and how we're susceptible if we've got those genetics to doing that. But then I had the book reviewed by Dr. Dan Watts, who's a functional doctor here in Sarasota. And he said, the story's good, but I think it would be helpful to have more background on that. Well, that got me going because I'm a caregiver educator. So I then go into, and with Dr. Bredeson's protocols, and what is it about diet? First of all, talk about the prevalence of toxicity, talk about what are things that we need to be doing now, how these things relate. And yes, a lot of the research, I have over 300 citations, not to be, I like to have things flow, and I wanted to have the information there for people who are interested in it, but not to make it a real technical. The reading, I just want it to flow and people understand pretty easily. And I weave into the story on how I didn't know these things. I didn't know about methylation until I found out I had methylation problems.
Oh, remind me what methylation is.
Well, methylation is, again, a genetic issue where you're not able to detoxify well.
Okay.
I guess from the HLA, which is another form that Dr. Shoemaker had identified. So, for instance, through my genetic testing, it showed that I cling to lead. Okay, so when I had a heavy metals test done, it showed I was very high in lead. So that meant I needed to detoxify. And I had to go through a series of detoxification treatments to do that. And so these are the things, when I say proactive, there are things that are not going to be brought up in conventional. And functional does recognize how heavy metals play a part, how mold and biotoxins play a part, how your genetics. And so you get a real big picture then of what your health challenges could be and what is important for you to follow.
I have a question for you. If for the first time someone goes to see a functional medicine practitioner, what would we ask them?
Well, they oftentimes will provide a very comprehensive questionnaire. In fact, the brain doctor that I saw here in Sarasota, his questionnaire took me hours to complete. So what it does is it gives them a very inside look. If you say, well, I've got gut issues, or I've got brain fog, or I've got, slow to heal, or some of these things just are keys. They're clues for them. So I think there's some very important tests that people should have. Heavy metals right now. I mean, I was, high in lead. I mean, I'm a baby boomer, grew up with lead paint and, lived in smog out in LA, before unleaded gasolines. So there's things that we just need to know that are not going to come out. That's why they're not being revealed in conventional tests. And I can't tell you how many people I've run into that say, yeah, I've gone to so many doctors and it all comes back as must be psychiatric, or you must be depressed, or something like that.
No, but I am now. I wasn't before.
Right. Well, back to methylation, one of the functional practitioners that I go to, she specializes in that. And she had a guest on who was a person that she trained with. And this woman said that the client, who was just 10 at the time, had something like a form of ALS. And he'd been to 40 different doctors. And basically, no one thought they could do anything. She worked on his methylation. He was in a wheelchair at the time, got out of the wheelchair, is high functioning, has a great job. And so that's the power of precision medicine. We're not making assumptions based on what we see or some of the characteristics, but it's precision in terms of getting down to it might just be a gene. And how do we overcome that? Like, I do take supplements. I have to take certain supplements because of my methylation issues. But man, there's a test that could be that I took, and before my methylation was off, and then had this test, and it was like perfect. It's because the practitioner that specializes in methylation knew exactly what I needed to get to make those adjustments to make my body operate the way that it's supposed to. So,
thank you. That's very explanatory.
It's a kind of a confusing thing, but that's in a nutshell what it is, and that it is something that can make a big difference.
Yeah.
Because people with poor methylation are prone to become autoimmune and have a lot of things. And it's really not so much what the label is, the diagnosis that people are given. What are they doing so that it's not a label? It's looking at, okay, toxicity is a root cause of this, or there might be infections. In my husband's case, it wasn't just toxicity. He also had gum disease.
Oh, yeah, you wrote about that. Yeah, fascinating.
It was the only thing that he had, but I didn't know at the time how. I knew its relationship to heart issues. I didn't know about the brain. And I do a quote in my book, and it says something about, that Candida bacteria loves to go make a beeline for the brain. Wow. And so, it was, again, a combination of root causes that caused the inflammation. And that's what we have to be careful that we're trying to do whatever we can to reduce inflammation. Yeah. Because when inflammation starts to ignite and we're eating things that we shouldn't, or we're not exercising, or we're not sleeping, all these things just add to our inflammatory load. And then things happen.
Things happen indeed, but finding ways to address those things is a good thing. And that's what we're doing today.
Right.
If you wouldn't mind, this is kind of jumping around a bit, but I would love you to share your fairy tale experience in Austria with the listeners.
Well, it is a chapter prior to telling the story of the book, because I wanted to show people who this guy was.
Mm-hmm.
He was the most loving soul, funny, really witty, great sense of humor. Anyway, we loved to travel, and I had a bucket list, and one of the things on my bucket list was to see the Neuschwanstein Castle, in Bavaria. So we took our girls. My daughter was in college and my youngest daughter was in high school. And we were dancing. My husband's, of course, our last name was Strauss. Here we were in Vienna, dancing to the Strauss waltz. It was sort of like one of those, as I described in the book, please pinch me, it's like, this can't be happening. And so that happened. That trip was just 6 months before our lives changed dramatically. And so it just shows you how fast, life can change. But I had no clues. There were no clues that, he was suffering from anything. But I have to back up because there was inflammation happening, but I didn't know it. He had been to a doctor 6 months before, he went down, so in the summer before, and there was nothing. He was in perfect health other than his gum disease. But that's because they hadn't checked toxic levels. They weren't, checking for the things that could indicate, got some problems here. And I kept all his medical records. Of course, I didn't know a lot about the tests. I didn't know about thyroid at the time. I mean, when I was doing the book, and I go back into some of these medical records, I said, why didn't they tell me he had thyroid issues? They weren't doing anything for his thyroid. It's just mind-blowing. So again, a reminder of why I felt it was so necessary and why I always recommend whatever test results you're getting, have them.
Yeah, have them and read them.
And I do share this in the book, but another reason why it was a big reinforcement of why I get my test results. While I was dealing with all my husband's stuff and not knowing what was going on with him, I started to have flutterings in my head. And I had a friend who had just had brain surgery, and she said, I don't know, you might want to have that thing checked. I go, oh, no, I'm sure it's just stress. We're fine. And she goes, no, you better check that out. That's not right. And turns out that I did have a brain tumor. But the doctor, when I called, because I had the results, and I called his office and I said, he said, oh, yeah, let me look at you. Oh, yeah, you're fine. I go, sorry, but what's this mass? Oh, yeah, I guess we better check that. So this is why
he would have dismissed it.
Just like all, the things that they were dismissing. When I took the research about the biotoxins, and I'm going, look to these people that actually worked with him. And the doctor, the same one that had dismissed my tumor, he said, well, we've agreed to disagree. I go, whoa. No, evidently you're not open to this research, because it was groundbreaking and they didn't learn it. And it does take about 20 years, from what doctors say, for research, after all it's peer reviewed and all these things, to finally be integrated. But in the meantime, think of how many lives are being changed from not getting answers. So that, again, that's why I had to write, because so many people are not getting answers. They're just told, and people are, okay, it's Alzheimer's, but look at the fact now that they know in research, clinical studies, patients themselves are describing what their life was like and now how their lives has changed. They're having a wonderful life experience as opposed to, not able to drive anymore. And a lot of these other, all of manifestations of what happens when you lose your independence. So,
do you have some numbers that go along with that?
I think one of the studies said that this was a study from about 2 years ago. They were able to reverse, or they did not continue to deteriorate, about 82% of the participants. So, and it depends how far along the disease has progressed.
Right.
Because in my husband's case, it may not have been too late had we known this before. But what happened is that, you continue to eat. And well, then let's get into some of the other factors, with diet being a big one. He was in assisted living. I was no longer in charge of providing the food. And he was eating what they have, a lot of starches, a lot of, I was just talking to my friend yesterday. She was just in a facility, and there were all those pink and blue and pink packets on the tables, the aspartame. It's, and so those are all things that can make a difference if we are aware. Again, awareness and just, education. It's really a time we have to educate ourselves. It does take more time. And yes, there's conflicting information out there. And so a lot of the big issues, oftentimes have conflicting information. So you just have to say, what does your gut say?
Yeah. And for me, it's like, when do I actually accept something? How many times do I have to hear something in order to go, ooh, I think there's something in this? But your book really helped to expand my thinking. And yeah, there's something really real here that needs to be embraced and accepted. And
Yes.
again, explored.
Right.
I thank you, because I think this is really good. There's been mornings where I don't want to do my exercises. And now since reading the book, it's like, I guess I'll do it.
Well, I've done a lot of wellness programs and a lot of helping people with weight management. And, now my focus would be, you may not want to do it for losing the weight. Do it for your brain. Mm-hmm. There's that much of a connection.
Yeah.
Do it for everything. Because if we can help to reduce the risk of inflammation in our bodies, we're doing wonderful things for our health destiny. And yeah, we can get lazy and go, oh, I don't want to do it today. But it's like,
yeah.
And don't feel guilty when you say, oh, I'm going to go to the gym today, or I'm not going to roll out my yoga mat or whatever. You just stick to a program that knows this is making me healthy. This is, I'm all about saving brains now, because
and that's a quote. I'm all about saving brains. There's another quote that you give in your book, and you say, caregiving is an endurance run of the heart. I just thought that was beautiful.
It is. It is an endurance run of the heart. It's an endurance run because it's such a combination of emotions. It's exhausting. It's confusing. It's frustrating. You're angry. You just go through this roller coaster of emotions. And I have to say, you have to remember who that person is underneath the disease. And there was a experience when my husband was probably the last 2 years, and he was in a skilled nursing care facility. And he said, people don't know who I am, what I've done. And I put together a notebook of testimonials from his attorney clients who said, it was your testimony. It was because of what you did. And he loved it because he had it in his room. So when people, came to visit him, and, unfortunately, what happened over time, because his behavior got so weird for a while, so many people just stopped. They just broke away because they thought it was psychiatric, which is why I think it's so important to identify what are you dealing with so that people understand.
Yeah, because there's so much stigma.
There is. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was sad in his case because he felt he could work.
Right.
And he was determined to do it. And it was sad because I got phone calls that he was exhibiting and he was doing crazy things.
And you do share those stories in the book. My heart was really tugged at when I was reading that. It's like, yeah, I can only imagine the loss he felt and the loss and embarrassment that you felt.
Right. Well, my hands were tied at that point because I legally couldn't do anything.
No, I know. He fired you.
Right.
Yeah, you're sharing such insight that I hope the listeners start to think about functional medicine as an option and detoxification as something to explore and keep our inflammations down.
Absolutely. The things that we can do to reduce inflammation and their lifestyle, it's called lifestyle medicine. I mean, now it's proving that it's helping to not only reverse dementia, but other issues as well. A lot of autoimmune issues, but we've got to reduce the things that are igniting the inflammation and knowing that we can have a different health destiny. And unfortunately, functional doctors, most of them are not covered by insurance, which gets into a whole nother issue that I talk about. But it is, if you're looking for answers or if you're refusing to accept that this is a done deal, I really encourage people to explore. And there are now there are more centers of people that are using the lifestyle medicine, using the protocols that are helping to both prevent and reverse cognitive decline.
What a note to end on. But before we end, would there be one personal tidbit that you would be so kind to share with the listeners?
Well, I haven't, my background, I was in charge of promoting fruits and vegetables for the trade association. And so we were doing a public service announcement. We didn't have the money for commercial. And so the producer of the show said, why don't you contact Julia Child to see if she'll do the narration? And so I called up, I went through her assistant, and she had used the association for a lot of research on her books.
Oh,
she graciously accepted.
Oh my.
And talk about a surreal moment. I was in her Cambridge kitchen cooking with Julia Child.
Wow. Okay, that's a great tidbit.
Yeah.
And probably another pinch me moment, right?
It was one of those, am I really in the kitchen cooking? But I actually have a photo to document.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for that. Now, Sandra, how can folks reach you?
Well, I have a website, sandrastrauss.com. And so it lists the different social media that I have there. But I'd love to hear from people. And if people do get the book, I would really appreciate that they go on to Amazon and leave a review, because all these algorithms and however they work, it does make a difference. And again, my goal is to get more people aware of what's happening and to take proactive measures to just create the wonderful life that they are designed to live.
That's beautiful. Well, I have a book, but it was actually gifted to me by you. I am very grateful for it. It's like I said, it has expanded my thinking and helped. It's challenging me to be better.
I love feedback like that, because So much. Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many hours. It was days, it was years, I don't know, to really dive into not only the story, but to what's so important for people to know now. And so it's well worth it knowing that it does make a difference.
It does make a difference. And I think we're really meant to hear this message. So, Sandra, I thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your wealth of information and knowledge on how we can all have a vibrant health destiny.
Thank you. It's just been a delight to be with you, and you are just a really fun interviewer. So, thank you so much, Allison.
Thanks. Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
There are so many takeaways from Sandra's caregiving story. Perhaps, like me, you now have a deeper understanding of the impact toxins can make on our health. How frustrating it must have been knowing that something was seriously impacting Rick's health. Yet each time they visited a doctor and underwent conventional testing, they were left with no answers, other than being told it must be of a psychiatric nature, or even depression. Now that would be depressing. Sandra knew that something was wrong, and her unrelenting pursuit led her to functional medicine. Through functional medicine, they received answers, as the doctors looked at the root causes of Rick's illness. They learned that Rick's biomarkers indicated excessively high inflammation, and that his genetics made him a poor detoxifier. In her book, Sandra expands on their experiences with functional medicine and what it all means. And you can certainly check out those 300 references she mentioned. Her findings shed light on the power of information and positive lifestyle choices. Perhaps, like me, you are now inspired to make positive or better lifestyle choices to transform our own health destiny. And if you are in the midst of your own caregiving journey and need some supports, I invite you to tap into Alongside caregiverconsulting.ca or Alongside Caregiver Consulting's Facebook page or Instagram account. If you'd like to share your story as a guest on the Island Treasures podcast, please contact me by email, either through my website or at alongsidecaregiverconsulting@shaw.ca. And thank you for tuning in today, and to Sandra Strauss for sharing your caregiving story and your message of hope in these inflammatory times. If you don't want to miss future episodes, be sure to subscribe to the Island Treasures podcast. See you next episode.